School environment and teacher training effectiveness. The moderator for this panel today is a dear friend, Eileen Gail Kugler, and she is the president of Embrace Diverse Schools and a global speaker and consultant on the unique benefits that diversity brings to schools, communities, and work sites, and strategies to strengthen them. She is the author of the award-winning Debunking the Middle Class Myth, Why Diverse Schools Are Good for All Kids, and executive editor of the new Innovative Voices in Education, Engaging Diverse Communities. Eileen's articles and commentaries appear in wide-ranging publications, including USA Today, The Washington Post, Educational Leadership, and Education Week. Eileen's work is informed by her continuing on-the-ground involvement, including an active volunteer life. Her family's volunteer commitment at a South African school, including creating a 23,000 book library, amazing, was featured in the Washington Post and the Voice of America. Please welcome Eileen Kugler.
Thank you very much. It's been a very interesting and informative morning. And I want to tell you about an experience I had recently. I was on Twitter, and I happen to find a lot of value in Twitter. There's a lot of interesting links. It's great professional development. I've made some amazing contacts around the world. And I was looking at this photo that was posted by a teacher, and the teacher said, "This is a great lesson in diversity." And what it was is 2 eggs, one with a brown shell and one with a white shell. And the teacher had cracked the white shell and put it in a bowl. And the teacher had cracked the egg with the brown shell and put it in the bowl. And the bottom line is, no matter what's on the outside, we're all the same on the inside. And it was so well received on Twitter, it had been retweeted about 350 times, which means that people thought this was such a great idea, they were just going to send it out to their own networks. And I read it and my heart dropped. Because the bottom line is we aren't all the same. That is really not our goal, to teach our children that we are all the same. What we want to teach our children and what we want to recognize as adults is we are all different. And that's what makes life enriching. That if we are only looking for that same egg, then when we don't see somebody whose yolk looks exactly like ours, what do we think? There's something wrong with them, because it's not me, right? I'm right. I got the perfect yolk. It's got to be them. So that already sets up this me versus you being the other. Another thing to think about is, which egg do you think was used as the model for the right egg? You think the white egg or the brown egg? Let's get real. It was the white egg that was the one that was the way it was supposed to be. The other one was, oh my goodness, it's just like the white egg. So let's think about that. Well, the bottom line for us as educators, as people who work with children, as adults who work with each other in diverse environments, is that every single one of us has something of value to share. And it's our job to figure out what that is. And it's quite amazing when you go into an interaction with someone with that in mind, you will not believe what you learn. Whether it is the person who is emptying the trash can at the end of the day, whether it is the student that just got all the publicity for getting into every Ivy League college, whether it is your peer that just finished their brilliant doctoral dissertation defense, or whether it is someone who really hasn't had a great deal of education, like the amazing people that I've met in South Africa. So this whole issue of equity, of viewing people as individuals for their worth, when you have that as part of you as an educator, then you look toward doing things that give everybody the opportunity to thrive. You provide opportunities and you go the extra mile. You make sure that there's outreach that enables people to take advantage of these opportunities. You make sure that the teachers in our classrooms have the education to understand these issues, so that around the world they're not taking these 2 eggs and cracking them open and saying, we are all the same, right? under the skin, so that they really understand that the differences are our strengths. And that's what this panel is going to be looking at. We're going to be talking about ways to make sure every child has an opportunity from pre-K, from preschool, all the way up through the university level, to think deeply about how to engage the other and how to learn from every person that we interact with. So we have a great panel, and I want to begin by introducing Dr. Sharon Robinson. Dr. Robinson has served as president and CEO of the American Association of Colleges for Teacher Education since 2005. A lifelong civil rights activist, Dr. Robinson has waged a personal crusade to realize the nation's moral and professional responsibility to educate and maximize the potential of minority and disabled students. Dr. Robinson was formerly president of the Educational Testing Services Educational Policy Leadership Institute. And before joining them, Dr. Robinson was Assistant Secretary of Education with the U.S. Department of Education's Office of Educational Research and Improvement, which is now the Institute of Education Sciences. She also held a variety of leadership positions at the National Education Association, including Director of the National Center for Innovation, NEA's Research and Development arm. So I know we are in for a very interesting and informative talk. Dr. Robinson.
Thanks so much for that kind introduction and for your reception. I really appreciate the opportunity to discuss what I do every day helping our member organizations, which are the schools, colleges of education across the country and around the world, actually. And it is it's a moment in time now when we are engaged in a very intense effort to change almost everything. And so as I was thinking about how to get into this topic with you today, just tell me how I advance this. What would be the, oh, I did, okay. Now I need to go back. What I was thinking about Rumi and the philosophy and the character of a group that would come together under the banner of the Rumi organization and the Rumi way of thinking. And one of my colleagues found this quote for me and brought it to my attention because she said, you know, this sounds kind of like you. And kind of like what we're trying to help teachers understand about themselves as continuous learners, and to identify what we're trying to do for the learners they will encounter. It is, you know, discover what excites you. Discover that passion that makes you want to learn more. Discover what it is that inspires new questions and new interest in you. And I think that is such a wonderful metaphor for teaching. It is why we get up and do it every day. It's not that the working conditions are very luxurious. Often we're making do with AV equipment that isn't all that we would want it to be, but it is what we have. And we come and share experiences that help that are based on exciting our spirit and helping students discover what excites theirs. I really call this discovering the high impact instructional practices. I mean, we call it pedagogy. It is what helps students learn. An important new construct in pedagogy that we're discussing quite extensively is that which we call academic language. Now, academic language is the language of the traditional disciplines, each one in and of itself, and the language of pedagogy, how people learn. And it asks this question: how do you help a student come into the discipline and find the answers to their questions, the students' questions, not the ones at the end of the chapter, not the questions that have been preordained by the state or the district, but the ones that arise from the interest of the student, whereby giving the student a reason to engage with whatever that curriculum objective might be, so that the content supports the learning and provides a context for learning. It is not necessarily the objective of the learning, but it becomes important when the student recognizes how this content relates to their questions. Other very high impact practices require extensive writing, literacy development. Why? Because it gives the students a chance to improve the expression of their ideas in the discipline so that they are communicating well with their peers and with others for whom it is important for them to engage. High impact practices, being a part of collaborative activities, so that students understand what they have to give to the group, and they understand how to embrace what others bring to a objective that you share. High impact practices, capstone events, so that students recognize when they have completed an important objective. They know you recognize when they have completed an objective, and they take the moment to recognize what they have gained as a part of their foundation, their capacity to take on the next challenge. So we are trying to bring this notion of high impact practices full circle from the conceptual all the way to the actual, documenting what students have gained. This is a way of helping us to recognize all that students bring, as well as the ambitions we have for them and the ambitions we hope to help to inspire in them. So, the responsibility of schools of education is to really get serious about these practices and understand how to develop the skills to conduct these practices in the candidates that they teach. So we're saying schools of education should be the places where you see the best pedagogy, where you see the very best in terms of engagement of all students, so that our candidates experience as learners the kind of practice we want them to implement as teachers. We want them to prepare beginning candidates to be, we call it practice ready. How do you do that? So, the big innovation for us that is really causing us to have to roll up our sleeves and work very, very hard is to create very rigorous, clinically based programs. That means they do not happen on campus. They happen where our candidates will practice. This means they've got to learn to partner with schools and K-12 settings throughout their communities, so that they can engage with their partners throughout the community to not just create clinical opportunities for their candidates. They engage to contribute to improve student learning in the community. So you can imagine, if you think about it, I mean, this is not what usually excites the soul of professors in the more traditional sense, right? Where we simply go deeper into our expertise and talk to others who are deep into that area of expertise. Now we got to come up and go out to understand how that knowledge can be used to get done something that's really, really important, like improving student learning. And you know, there are schools in every community that you would deem a high-needs school. usually they're really pretty near university campuses. You could almost walk to them in most instances. And these are the schools we recommend as the targets for these clinical experiences. You think, why? Well, they should be targets for developing these partnerships because they should be sites upon which you are ready to lavish all that you know and all that you would ever hope to see as an arena of learning for students. You should join in this partnership not just as an entity bringing a new function to this school, which is developing these candidates, but as a citizen bringing passion and determination to bring for these students all that you would want for your own, thereby creating a place where these students will experience state-of-the-art teaching. It's going to mean change all round. The job description for everybody is now different because everybody owns 2 major functions instead of 1. But the community and those children are the beneficiaries of a degree of attention and development that should have an exponential impact to the good. So this is not simply a slogan. This is really hard work. I can give you numerous examples from Arizona State University to Winthrop College, a small university serving rural South Carolina, to urban centers. This is the work of the moment and where we are headed as a community. And then we want our candidates to go into practice with us, continuing to support them and help them to identify how they can develop as a practitioner to become confident in some of the most challenging settings that you can imagine. So everybody's talking about accountability. If we want to measure program outcomes, accountability is what makes headlines, the accountability or lack thereof. And, you know, we've developed our own approach to this because we want accountability for trying to get better, which means that you've got to be explicitly aware of how you are performing right now with respect to individual candidates and with respect to your program at large. There's several federal tools that we are using, and we're using to advance a couple of big ideas. In order to be productive, programs must work in partnership, as I have explained, to produce clinically based programs. In order to be productive, you have to be aware of student learning in those clinically based programs, the K-12 student learning. The university must extend itself not just in an incidental partnership, but in a deep partnership that becomes pretty systemic and is intended to last for a good while, because it will require an investment. For each of these federal opportunities, the university will have to invest 100% match of whatever the federal government provides. And we are urging that these programs develop these partnerships in high-need schools. Another tool of accountability has to be awareness of our own outcomes. Toward that end, we've developed a system of performance assessments that we're using as an industry-wide effort to help document the capacity of teachers to discover what excites them, what inspires them, and what will inspire their students. I look forward to engaging with you from a perspective of the colleges of education being party to and partners in addressing not just the intellectual and economic interest of our country, but addressing our social justice agenda by being confident that all of our students are prepared to participate as contributing students worthy of full respect and engagement. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Dr. Robinson. Next, we have Dr. Julia Gillot. Dr. Gillot is a research associate in the Center on Labor, Human Services, and Population at the Urban Institute. Her research focuses on child well-being and immigration, with an emphasis on the implications of national and local public policies toward immigrants for child and family well-being. She's currently involved in an analysis of administrative data on instability in child care subsidy receipt, a multi-site evaluation of a supportive housing intervention for families in the child welfare system, and an exploration of promising practices for connecting immigrant families to state pre-kindergarten programs. So it's not just having these programs, and as she will discuss right now, it is how do we make sure that the people who could benefit from the programs are actually taking part in them. Thank you, Dr. Gillot. Okay.
Thanks so much for that nice introduction, and thank you to the organizers for including me in this great conference, and thank you all for showing up today. So I'm going to be presenting some work, a piece of research that we did at the Urban Institute. This is with my colleagues Gina Adams and Sandra Huerta, looking at how to support immigrant families' access to state pre-kindergarten programs. And in this, we ask, what can local providers do to increase pre-kindergarten access to children of immigrants and to English language learners, which might show up as ELLs on these slides, and what can state policymakers do to really support that work? So I think those of you who were here this morning saw some of these demographics, but children of immigrants are a growing share of the US child population. They've grown from about 13% in 1990 to about a quarter today. And if you look at young children of immigrants, those who would be attending pre-kindergarten, these shares are even higher. And immigrant families are touching a growing number of US communities. So while we know that the states with the highest numbers of immigrants are California and Texas and Florida and New York and Illinois, states in the US Southeast are seeing really rapidly growing immigrant populations. So many communities who haven't been working with immigrant families are having immigrants move into their communities, and the national origins of immigrants are changing as well. We know that early education helps children of immigrants get school ready, but children of immigrants are underrepresented in pre-K programs and other early childhood education programs. So we know that some children of immigrants, not all, start school at a learning disadvantage relative to their peers. And a lot of evidence shows that early education is really helpful at getting kids school ready overall. I think the research is pretty unanimous on that point. And studies that have looked specifically at children of immigrants or English language learners suggest that these kids gain as much or even more than other children. And some states have actually started to analyze performance in their pre-K programs. And a few states have broken out the experiences of children of immigrants or Spanish speakers or English language learners, finding that they make gains even more than other kids in their programs. But evidence also shows that children of immigrants have lower rates of enrollment in early childhood education overall. We don't have statistics on pre-K in particular, but in early education, they're anywhere from 4 to 15 percentage points lower in rates who attend early education. Of course, there are a number of barriers to access that create these disparities, and some of the barriers that affect immigrant families are the same barriers that affect all families. So lack of knowledge about available programs, transportation issues, schedules that are misaligned with work. Most pre-K programs are half day, and for working parents that can be really difficult. But immigrant parents are disproportionately likely to work in jobs that aren't flexible and don't allow parents to move their schedules around to take their kids to pre-K. On top of these barriers that face other parents, there can be language barriers, a lack of comfort with government programs, particularly for groups that may have had bad experiences with governments in their home country or who may have undocumented status. Accessing benefits through the US government can be a scary endeavor, or an uncomfortable endeavor at least. And sometimes programs aren't comfortable for parents because of the cultural orientations or the assumptions that are inherent in the programs. So we tried to move beyond this understanding of what these barriers are to what practices can be helpful and have been used so far in facilitating greater access to pre-K among immigrant families. So we conducted 40 phone interviews with pre-K program directors, Head Start program directors, state pre-K directors, and other early childhood education specialists to hear what's been going on so far that looks promising in terms of increasing access. And we focus particularly on states with big pre-K programs, these states that I mentioned that have large immigrant populations already, and the states that have quickly growing immigrant populations. And just to define what I mean when I say pre-K here, our focus was really on state-funded pre-kindergarten programs. This is an area of big investment. Of course, President Obama, has said a number of times and put in his latest budget that he'd like to expand pre-kindergarten. New York and San Antonio and Seattle and other cities are really pushing hard to expand publicly funded pre-kindergarten right now. So that was our focus, although many of these lessons apply more broadly to early education. And state-funded pre-K programs, just as a context for these, outreach and enrollment and other assistance strategies vary a lot state by state. So some states have very small programs targeted to low-income or high-risk families. Some states have universal programs that are available to all kids. Instruction can be provided in schools or in a broader variety of settings. There's differences in quality standards. So that's in the background of all of this work. So we identified strategies along 3 main domains: outreach, enrollment, and building relationships with parents. And I should say before I get into these strategies that some of the things I'm going to say are going to sound really obvious. Many of the strategies for increasing access for immigrant families are the same for all families and are just good practices for getting the word out. And I'll talk through some of the constraints that exist as well. But in our interviews, we heard a lot of hunger for ideas. So as I mentioned, there are many communities that are just seeing new diversity in their immigrant populations. And some administrators are really building up these strategies of how to reach immigrant families from square one. They don't have, resources, they don't have the time to go research what other places are doing. So we wanted to just compile useful strategies in one place in hopes that they're helpful for the people who are really searching for this. So the first step for connecting immigrant families to pre-K is to find out who needs to be reached, who's under-enrolling. And there are a variety of ways to look at this. One is, of course, census data on just who are the immigrants in the community, what languages are being spoken, where are they living, in relation to where programs are located. Something that's really nice, I guess, or a sort of a convenient thing is that most kids in the US now go to kindergarten. And so if you look at the characteristics of kids in pre-K compared to the characteristics of kids in kindergarten, you see a group is missing. That's a group to understand, are they getting early education somewhere else, or is this an underserved group that could really be reached through pre-K? And then an idea that came up a lot was this Head Start style community needs assessment. So Head Start grantees conduct this community needs assessment every 3 years, which is sort of multimodal data collection, drawing on existing data and having conversations in the community and talking with parents to find out who's in the community and what are their needs and how can they be best served through Head Start and through other community programs. And this can be used for pre-K as well. And then once programs have identified who needs to be reached, of course, the next step is reaching out through creating community events or going to community events in high immigrant neighborhoods or celebrating holidays or occasions that may draw more immigrant families, reaching parents where they already go, so laundromats or bodegas or other stores that immigrant families go to. An idea that came up a lot was going to WIC offices because all families are eligible for WIC regardless of immigration status, and that's a program targeted to families with young kids, so that's a great place to find young families with kids. Parent-led outreach can be really effective since parents can kind of share their orientation and their concerns with each other, and that's also a way to save money on outreach, which I'll get into a little bit in a bit, and using various forms of media outreach. So new media, Facebook and Twitter, using radio, foreign language newspapers, television ads, using the public access channel on cable, and every strategy possible because different parents consume media in different ways. So as broadly as you can reach out, you can reach more parents. And some states are actually starting to support this work. So Texas has created sort of a package of advertising materials for websites and radio and TV that are in English and Spanish. I don't think they have any other languages at this point, but that's something that providers can just take. It's online, they can just use it and put it up on their local station. So the main reason that programs don't do more outreach is simply funding. So most states don't allocate funding to their programs specifically for outreach, and programs get this pot of money and they say, well, I can either serve more kids or I can spend money doing a fancy advertising campaign. seems like a tough choice to spend on advertising. So a lot of programs are looking for cheap ways to do this. So one question is how to staff outreach activities. Some programs can draw on staff who have other responsibilities but may have some hours in their schedule that they can do outreach. Others, as I mentioned, draw on parents and have some parent volunteer programs, maybe with a small paid incentive, like a gift pack if you recruit, a certain number of other parents or something like that. So that can be a way to maximize limited resources. Some programs are starting to assess the best investment so they can put limited dollars in the best place. So some programs ask on the enrollment form, how did you hear about us? And parents can write it down. And if you find out a certain strategy is really working or a certain fare is really driving parents to the program, invest there. And then another way that states can sustain or sort of encourage programs to do outreach is by asking and reporting requirements. So states fund their pre-K programs differently. Some have competitive grants, some allocate money based on enrollment, but most of them have some mechanism where the programs are reporting back to the state what it is that they're doing, either in advance or afterwards. And that's a place where states are asking programs, what are you doing on outreach to diverse communities? That can really incentivize outreach by making the programs think, well, what are we doing? And they have to write something in that box, so that can kind of spur thoughts about that and hopefully action as well. So once parents know about pre-K and want to enroll, there's a whole other set of documentation barriers that certain immigrant families face. So documenting residence can be hard if you're living doubled up with family members and your name is not on the lease. Documenting children's age can be hard if you don't have birth certificates. Documenting income can be hard if you have irregular employment and you don't have normal pay the pay stubs that many programs expect. So many programs have adopted flexible ways of dealing with this. If you talk to programs in high immigrant areas, they'll say, sure, we take letters from whoever is on the lease or whoever manages the building to say that the person lives there. In terms of children's age, if they don't have a birth certificate, we can either help them obtain the birth certificate by calling the office with the parent or allowing baptismal records or hospital records or other types of records. In terms of income, if people don't have pay stubs or tax returns, often they can get letters from employers in certain places to get around that tricky documentation requirement. And I should say there that, you can see, or programs talk a lot about if their program is income targeted versus not income targeted, that they'll see a difference. So in DC, because they blend different forms of funding for early childhood education, you actually don't have to document your income to sign up for pre-K, and that makes it a lot easier for undocumented or mixed status families to not even have to figure out how they're going to get that paperwork to the school. And then finally, most pre-K programs, we didn't talk to any. I've never heard of any that screen based on immigration status, and most don't require social security numbers, but some schools just use social security numbers as a convenient, unique identifier for kids. Other programs blend funding from child care subsidies, and so they might list social security numbers on the form as an optional field because that helps programs determine whether kids are eligible for those subsidies. But this can be really scary for families, even if parents and kids are citizens. If there's someone in the family who's undocumented, having this question can be a deterrent. So I think that's something programs can do is think really clearly about, do they really need this number? And if they do want to have it on the form, having some really clear language stating that this is very optional. Other sort of just basic logistics that can create barriers are showing up at a certain time in a certain place to fill out certain forms to enroll your kids. And so having papers translated, having interpreters available can be helpful. Allowing multiple modes of applying over the phone, online, in person, by mail can help parents who have different constraints. Application assistance, whether it's through nonprofit organization partners or application assistance through the school, can be helpful. And some programs talked about having big centralized application, and that was a way that they could have all kinds of interpreters on hand and other social support services for families as needs came up. Others talked about having a wide variety of times and locations for registration, so parents, whatever their work schedules, could hopefully find one time they could show up in one place that they could get to easily. And finally, the last way to encourage enrollment in pre-kindergarten for children of immigrants is to make programs comfortable to parents and to work on building relationships with parents. And so the very most basic, easiest thing to do is just have a welcoming attitude. We talked with some programs that are located in communities that had passed local anti-immigrant ordinances or bills, and they talked about how they just really needed to reaffirm that schools are a welcoming place for anyone of any background, of any immigration status, of any national origin or religion, and that this needed to be communicated from the top down. So bus drivers and cooks and teachers and administrators all needed to understand that serving all immigrants is a core piece of what the school does or what the program does, that this isn't, serving immigrant families and working through these language barriers isn't an extra burden, but it's actually an inherent part of what the program is about. Many programs actively engage and include parents, and this involves reaching out to parents and going to where parents are, maybe having parent-teacher meetings in apartment complexes or in people's homes, doing some home visiting, and also bringing parents into school. So different programs do this in different ways. In addition to parent-teacher conferences, having like a breakfast for parents when they drop off their kids, and maybe they talked about having a local celebrity, like someone from the news, come and give a talk. It's something to draw parents into the school, or having cultural nights in the school where parents can share a piece of their culture, something like that. Building translation and interpretation capacity, of course, is really important. Not all programs can hire all of the bilingual staff or all of the bicultural staff that they need to serve all of the diverse immigrant families in their community, but of course, working toward that helps. And in the meantime, there are many ways of doing translation and interpretation more cheaply by centralizing translation of written documents, using language phone lines for interpretation, or some schools have invested in these UN-style simultaneous translation systems to have parent-teacher conferences in many, many languages all at once. And states can set standards for parent engagement. So many state pre-kindergarten programs have certain requirements for what programs should do to engage parents, and making sure that keeps a focus on engaging diverse communities and immigrant communities can be helpful in spurring this thinking and spurring this action at the local level. So just to wrap up, I just want to say these maps show that demographics are really changing in the country, and it's affecting different communities in a lot of different ways in terms of growing numbers of immigrants and changing national origins and increasing numbers of languages. And given that children of immigrants are under-enrolled in pre-K, as there is this effort in many communities to expand pre-K, increasingly programs will be needing to reach out to immigrant families. And this might seem daunting, but there are many strategies available from a wide variety of places of how to do this work, and there are a lot of things that state leaders can do as well to support this work. So I just want to thank our interview respondents and the NEKC Foundation for supporting this. Thank you.
I really appreciate the work you're doing, I think all of us do, in the area of outreach to communities to make sure that they understand what's available, and also for the people who are planning and implementing programs, that they understand that it's more than just hosting the program. A lot of times when I work with diverse schools or diverse school districts, I will have a teacher say to me, well, it's open to everyone. I mean, this is an AP class, anybody can take it. It's just these certain students. And there's no recognition that for some students and some families, they may just not see that that's what they do. They don't take AP classes. Nobody ever told them they could take AP classes, or that this was the right thing for them. Or again, in this issue of a pre-K program, that there are obstacles, cultural obstacles, language obstacles, legal obstacles, and the most critical first step is to make sure that you are, as planning these programs, as doing the outreach, you are looking at the tough questions. What do we need to do differently? How do we need to change it so that it meets the needs of the people we're trying to serve? So thank you very much. We're going to go back to the college environment and teacher training, which is such an important piece of this, because at the heart of education, and a couple of people said it today, it's the relationship between student and teacher. And so we need to make sure that our teachers are getting the training they need to do, the work they need to do. Because as also has been said, they don't go into it for the salaries and the perks. Dr. Agnes Cave is the Director of Teacher Education and Associate Professor of Education at the Catholic University of America. She is also the Certification Officer, Director of Teacher Preparation Accreditation, Coordinator of Academic Advising, Coordinator of the Elementary Teacher Education Program, Coordinator of the Study Abroad Program, and an undergraduate advisor. She serves as a state-level board of examiner who has completed many accreditation visits at other universities, and she serves as chair and co-chair of numerous professional committees. I didn't even include them because there were too many things she was involved in. She has published articles in the area of teacher education, reflection, accreditation, and children's writing development. Her upcoming book is about the role of reflective thought in teacher education, which is a special issue of mine, so we need to talk more later. Dr. Agnes Scaife.
Thank you so much for this warm welcome. Sorry, I hope that you can hear me and you can hear my Hungarian accent. First of all, as I start my speech, I would like to ask how many of you have teaching experience, either in the U.S. or internationally? Okay, and including how many of you will be teachers? So, quite a few of you. And how many of you are international students who were born and maybe raised in another country? Quite a few of you. Okay. I would like to tell you how my presentation is connected to my panelist presentation, more specifically to Dr. Sharon Robinson's presentation, who talked about high impact practices of teachers. And obviously this is a very important discussion because we always look at how teachers can support student learning. And when we think about effective teachers, there are a lot of characteristics that describe good teachers, and we know who the good teachers are because we have had our own experiences in our classrooms, right? We have a list of the teachers who inspired us and whom we still love, even though we haven't seen them for a few decades. Good teachers have to have content knowledge of the discipline that they teach. Think about maybe your high school math classes. Did your teachers always knew math? If they were supposed to teach math, okay, that's a question. And even if they know the content, do they have the pedagogical, content-specific pedagogical knowledge? Did they know how to teach you math? Okay? And even when they have the content and they have the pedagogy, do they care whether you learn or not? Do they have the dispositions? Do they have the professional the care, the professional dispositions, the value system that everybody counts in my classroom? Did they care for you? Did they care about your learning? And do they have the ability to reflect on their own practice so that they can improve what they do in the classroom? It's okay to make a mistake once, but we don't want to continue making the same mistakes, right? So we always want to think about what we do so that we do a better job tomorrow. So there are a lot of characteristics of effective teachers, but is there one that is more powerful than the others? Of course, this is a very difficult question to ask. Should it even be asked? And of course, the reason why this question is asked is because we, teacher educators, want to focus on those areas even more when we know that they are the foundation for effectiveness. And this question was posed by Dr. Margaret Wang from Temple University and her co-authors, who actually set out to answer this question using a very sophisticated meta-analysis method, examining hundreds of research articles that looked at various variables that examined what really makes a huge impact, what is the most influential variable in this very complex teaching learning process. And when I ask my college students what they think is the most influential variable, they talk about parental involvement, they talk about teachers' content knowledge, they talk about pedagogy and high-impact practices, they talk about school funding, they talk about socioeconomic status, the community characteristics where the children come from. And I keep listening to all the reasons that they can come up with to explain why sometimes learning just does not happen. There is actually a lot of research that examines how much time is spent or wasted in the classroom and how little on-task engagement occurs in the classroom. And if you think about all the variables like Okay, we have to spend time counting lunch money, and we have to have recess, and we have to stand up in line for recess. Hours and minutes just kind of evaporate from the school day. So how much time is really spent on learning? So my college students keep listing all the variables that they think impact student learning, and they are very surprised when I tell them that Dr. Wang's research revealed that the single most important and the most influential factor that impacts student learning is classroom management. And some of you who are international students, I wonder if you ever took a course in classroom management. I have traveled around the world, and I know for a fact that in some countries, classroom management is not taught. Can you relate to that? And this is one of the most challenging and one of the most complex tasks and skill that teachers have to master and implement. I supervise college students who teach from pre-K through 12th grade. So I have sat in high schools, in the back, in high school classrooms. I have sit on the tiny chairs in pre-K, watching my student teachers teach. And I have seen beautiful classes where students take risks and they enjoy learning and they spend a lot of time studying, and there isn't the complaining and the wasting time and the fighting, but everyone knows what to do. And the school day just flows smoothly, and it's a joy. And those are the teachers who are, of course, wonderful and they are knowledgeable, but they are very good classroom managers. They know how to create an environment that is conducive to learning, where the kids are happy. And that's a very big deal, because many children have to deal with so many difficulties that this is beyond the scope of my speech today, to think about all the issues that they have to deal with at home, to make sure that they are happy, they are comfortable, they feel worthy, they feel loved, they feel delighted. And if we think about all the variables that can go wrong, classroom management is the place where a lot of the times things do go wrong. Classroom management, the way I look at it, is really the foundation. It's really the infrastructure upon which the schoolhouse and learning in it occur, and where they are founded. When I have seen a lot of teachers with beautiful lesson plans, beautiful essential questions, everything is logically laid out, beautiful activities, but they never got around to teaching because the kids were hanging from the chandelier. Not that there are chandeliers in DCPS public schools, but you get the idea. So classroom management is a very important, influential skill that needs to be taught. You are not born knowing how to handle the learning environment, so that we have an opportunity to get to the beautiful lesson plan. And when I was asked to speak today, the title that I was given said discipline/classroom management. So I thought I would point out that the way we look at classroom management today is beyond discipline. Discipline, the way I look at it, is a one-dimensional approach with a bag of tricks to diminish and eradicate misbehavior so that everyone just keep quiet, let me teach, kind of an approach. It has been replaced by a comprehensive approach in classroom management that is based on taking the whole individual child, everything around that child, the cultural experiences, the knowledge background, the learning experiences, the dignity of the child into consideration. Because effective teachers are able and smart enough to create the learning environment that meets their students' needs. Think for a second. When your needs are met as a child, you probably won't have the kind of frustrations that many of us have had, or we had when we were children. So just the fact that children's needs are met, it already automatically, by default, reduces the occurrences of misbehavior. Think for a second. How many children here in the US and in other countries go to school hungry? How many of them witness difficulties at home in terms of abuse, violence, rampant drug abuse, violent video games, horrible TV shows? At one point, kids don't even know what's okay, what's not okay, because what they see on TV and what they see in video games seems like reality. So if we think about all these student needs in terms of cultural background, ethnic background, learning experiences, and what they have been exposed to, we can meet those needs and allow children to participate in an environment that creates this warmth so that you feel loved, you feel worthy, you feel a valued, contributing member of that community. It already sets you up to be happy and to be more delighted. And of course, if you are not hungry, that kind of helps. Once teachers are able to create this environment where you feel that your needs are met and you feel safe, and some of you who studied Maslow's hierarchy, you can go through the list, that you feel safe and you feel secure and loved, and you feel that you belong to this wonderful, loving community where you are a contributing member and your work counts and you contribute to the well-being and the well-functioning of the community, where you feel that you have good reputation, that you have a status in the group. You feel you belong, you feel good about yourself, and you know that others think well about you. Where your cognitive curiosity is fulfilled by engaging meaningful, authentic learning activities. It's already a happy place, right? And then when your environment is aesthetically pleasing, and sometimes my heart wrenches when I see schools that don't have the resources to make a pretty place for children to be comfortable with. So when all these needs are met, you feel much more willing and much more able to pay attention to the teacher. And smart teachers, once they create this warm, welcoming environment and they meet their students' needs, they have structures in place. Isn't that easier for us to behave properly and appropriately when we know what the expectations are, right? Imagine you go to a country, you go to Japan for a wedding, you don't know how to behave. I bet you don't know how to behave at a Hungarian wedding. But if I tell you what to do, you'll be fine. Same for children. So if we teach them, these are the routines, okay? So this is what we are going to do. This is okay, that's not okay. Again, we have to remember that the home environments often are such that it's very difficult for children to even grasp what is all right at a school building, because at home, other things are fine. So we create these routines, and we also involve all the students in a classroom community where we create rules, right? We create rules and we decide what's appropriate. Use your words instead of your hands and your legs. When you have a disagreement, talk instead of kicking and hitting. And what are the consequences when those rules are not followed? So when those routines and the rules and the consequences are all set up, then the teachers have done a lot to prevent problems. So instead of having this reactive approach where, okay, I know that someone will misbehave and then I'm just going to do something like shoot them down, instead of that reaction, you can have prevention. And then we all know, and those of you who have taught, you know that no matter how wonderfully you are prepared and how great your preventative measures are, there will always be children who just have a bad day, right? So this is never perfect. But for those situations, you can have those very dignified, loving strategies that still treat the other person as a beautiful human being who just happened to make a mistake. So you focus on the deeds rather than the doer, and you help them make it right. Because if we remember how many mistakes we made, and how happy we were when a teacher understood us and just helped us and guided us, then we can be better helpers for our students. Now, because I teach a course on classroom management. I could go on for approximately 8 hours nonstop about this topic, but I understand that time is running out. So I'm just going to stop here, and I engage you, and I welcome your any questions you may have now or at the end of the presentation. And I thank you for your attention.
That's okay. So while we're setting up, I just want to basically thank you again for that. And I always go back to this idea of any child who rises up from challenging circumstances can always identify the teacher that first believed in him or her. And it's because the teachers have believed the child has value. And when you go into that situation believing that's the case, then you set up the situation where every child can thrive. I want to introduce our final speaker on the panel, and that is Dr. Harold Barber. He is the principal of the historic Samuel Coleridge Taylor Elementary School, which is located in the West Baltimore neighborhood of Upton Druid Heights. And now you know why he was a little late, because I'm sure it wasn't an easy drive from Baltimore. During his tenure as principal, he has cultivated a vibrant learning community by developing strong partnerships with local institutions, such as the University of Maryland School of Social Work, to address non-academic factors related to health and poverty of African American students in an extremely economically challenged neighborhood. So once again, we see that while we need to have really good instruction in the classroom, there is so much more to helping students of all backgrounds thrive.
Good afternoon. Again, I'm Harold Barber, principal of the historic Samuel Coleridge Taylor Elementary School, located in Baltimore, Maryland. Just a show of hands, how many of you here are familiar with the HBO series, The Wire? Wow, more than I thought. So our neighborhood is exactly what you see depicted in the show, The Wire. We're located in an area where one may consider it to be high poverty, where kids come with a lot of different needs and challenges beyond just the academic factors prior to even coming into school. So this is a very challenging work for us to actually undertake. So we figured that in order to address what we were seeing with students when they actually enter school age, we needed to address things that contributed to certain things that we were seeing prior to students coming to school. Factors such as prenatal care, okay, factors such as school readiness skills, talking to students, making sure that kids feel healthy, kids feel safe, and they're coming from a very rich environment where they feel supported and their Maslow needs are being met as well. So in looking at all this and in the work that we do, we found that this is beyond what's capable of being done just by the school itself, okay? So we partner with the University of Maryland School of Social Work in an initiative called Promise Heights. And our goal was to actually work with students looking at health factors, socioeconomic factors, and also literacy, not only with the children, but also adults as well. So the mission of Promise Heights, you see, is to create a comprehensive family, comprehensive child, family, community building model in West Baltimore that provides support to children between ages 0 and 23 through 23, with educational, social, health, economic opportunities that allow them to thrive and succeed in work and family life. So here you see the Promise Heights method, place-based. So there are 4 Promise Heights schools within our neighborhood. So we have myself, the historic Samuel Coleridge Taylor Elementary School. We have Furman L. Templeton. We also have Booker T. Middle School of the Arts and the Renaissance Academy. So there are 4 schools total. So the goal is to really start a pipeline of addressing some of the needs at the elementary level, middle school level, and follow them through high school as well as college and career. And the approach is early. The earlier we can actually approach and start providing intervention, the better students will be prepared when they enter school. Comprehensive. We have a multiple of various supports and partnerships within the school to address various needs that our students are coming to us with. And as I continue to talk about review the data, and if we have the time, I just want to show you a glimpse of some of the work that we're doing, so you can actually get a picture of some of the challenges and what we're doing to overcome those challenges. Collaborative, preventative, evidence-based, and ongoing evaluation. So we're constantly evaluating the work that we do, refining as we go along. Just to give you a sense of our community, the Upton Druid Heights community, a neighborhood in distress. Okay, 58% of children live in poverty versus 28% in Baltimore. Okay, 53% of households, okay, have income of less than $15,000. Less than $15,000. Okay, 39 to 49% of adults attain less than a high school diploma or GED. Hospitalization rates for asthmatic children in Baltimore are 3 times higher than the U.S. Chronic absenteeism, a huge issue, where we had previously 25% plus of our students were missing 20 plus more days of schooling throughout the course of one school year. That was a huge issue. Many housing vacancies and much homelessness. McKinney-Vento, a lot of kids actually come to us what's called couch surfing, meaning that they'll stay with a relative from week to week and have no stable housing condition. And also, as a result, the lowest life expectancy in Baltimore City. So the Thomas Heights pipeline is to actually look at how we're tracking the services and providing supports to students prior to their arrival in school, and also providing it during the early childhood programs, elementary programs, middle school, high school, college programs, and then eventually through the workforce. So at my particular school, we have some very broad things that I'm going to talk about with more specificity as it relates to my school. The Promise Heights by age group. Okay, so pregnancy to 2 years. We have a program called the Judy Center. The Judy Center is the early childhood program. We service students from birth to age 5. So I have a family service coordinator who actually works with parents who are pregnant, making sure that they receive prenatal services and making sure that they're eating healthy and taking care of themselves. And then when the children are actually born, they come to the school and continue to work with the family service coordinator, and eventually they enter into our pre-K program and then eventually into our kindergarten program. Next year, we're starting a Head Start program so we can reach students as early as age 3. And then the year after, we hope to bring in a program where we can bring kids in as early as 18 months to really start addressing and providing those services there at the school. We also a community resource school. Community resource school, we have, again, as I mentioned, 26 different partners that actually provide various supports to students and families, because we understand in order to educate the whole child, it's not just the child, we're also addressing the parents. So when you reduce the stress level of what we see at home with the parents, inherently you're also serving children. Out of school time, we've added 35% additional time to our school day. So students enter school approximately 7:15 in the morning, and they leave at approximately 6 p.m. in the afternoon. Within that part, they are involved in the comprehensive school program and also the after-school program where they receive homework assistance, they receive enrichment activities, and they also receive supper, and supper is the last activity before they leave. So again, the concept of educating the whole child, making sure that their needs are met here at the school. And so when teachers actually receive students, they see the continuum of services that are offered here within the school to help support the kids and families. Be More for Healthy Babies, where we have a group of mothers who actually work as a support group, and it's an evidence-based curriculum that's used to help support mothers when they're pregnant and also when they deliver, just to help them in that transition and teaching them how to become parents. And this is a partnership, a multidisciplinary partnership with the School of Medicine, University of Maryland, as well as the School of Social Work. Parent University. We actually teach parents how to become parents, okay? So there's a multitude of partnerships. We have the School of Nursing, School of Social Work, School of Medicine, Center for Infant Studies, and infant and toddler programs. So again, that whole concept of educating the whole child. And prior to their arrival into K-12 education, we try to be as preventative as possible in addressing some of these issues that we were seeing prior to students coming to school. Community Resource School. Again, I mentioned we are a community resource school. where we have various programs, and the school is actually seen as the hub of the community. So we also have a GED program where adults, again, when I show the stats of adults who did not have either a high school diploma or GED, we're doing something about it to address that population. Children who are coming to school hungry and not fed. We also have a partnership with the Maryland Food Bank where we provide food to students and families on Thursdays, and every Friday we have what's called a backpack program where every student who are identified as extreme poverty, up to 75 students, receive a backpack full of food to take home for that particular weekend. Chronic absenteeism. This was a huge issue and a big concern of mine, and also I knew our interim chief executive officer. So we took a very aggressive approach. So when I was first appointed principal, the first thing that I did, along with members of my team, we visited every student home who was identified as being chronically absent. We took notes, very detailed notes, to find out exactly why students were not coming to school and coming to school on a regular basis and coming to school on time. So we basically used that data to actually work with the University of Maryland and Promise Heights to write different grants to help provide supports to families to remove some of those barriers that we were seeing. Breathmobile had a large amount of our students coming to us who were asthmatic, and they just didn't have the resources to have those areas addressed. So we gleaned this information from our home visit. So what we did, we partnered again with the University of Maryland, and we have what's called a Breathmobile. So the Breathmobile visits our school at least once a month and provides free services to students who are identified as having asthma. Okay, we had a student at our middle school, Booker T, who unfortunately passed away a couple of years ago as a result of having an asthmatic attack that was not addressed. So that really helped heighten the awareness of asthma within our community. Here, just wanted to show you some of our data in terms of our historical data, where we were before, looking at our attendance. Our attendance is increasing, so more children are coming into school, our particular neighborhood. Daily attendance, again, that was an area that we worked on specifically, whereas last year we had 92.1 students who were attending school on a regular basis, and as of this point, we're at 95.2. And students who were missing less than 5 days, last year we were at 18.6, now we're at 8.2. And students who are identified as being chronically absent, again, those youngsters who have missed 20 plus days, and we went down from 22.6 down to 14.7. Students who we service with students with disabilities, that number increased from 18.4 to 22.2. And free and reduced lunch, we have a very high population of free and reduced lunch students. And suspension rate was something that we aggressively worked on as well, because we found that kids who are coming from high poverty neighborhoods, if you suspend them and they spend more time at home, they're not learning. Okay, so we provide the services and we address the needs that we saw when they actually come to school, and then moved on from there. And then again, I shared similar characteristics of our neighborhood with you earlier, whereas we looked at Baltimore, the state of Maryland, and the U.S., where we looked at residents without high school credentials. The U.S., that's 12.9, Maryland, 17%, Baltimore, 31%, in our particular neighborhood, 49%. Single-parent households, okay, U.S., 16.9, Maryland, 27%, Baltimore, 53%, in our neighborhood, 85%. Residents living in poverty, again, U.S. 14.3%, Maryland 9.1%, Baltimore 22.9%, in our particular neighborhood 49.8%. So look at these there's a need for the work that we do. Okay. Hopefully we have some time. I'd like to just show you a glimpse of some of the other things that we're doing so you can see and hear from different partners. I have one of my partners here with me, my family school resource coordinator, Ms. Taylor, is here with me. She'll be able to entertain any questions that you may have as well about some of the work that we're doing. But I think just seeing the picture itself, right, and hopefully coming to actually visit our school, get a sense of our community and the challenges that we have, and how we're going about what we're doing to address those challenges, will be really groundbreaking. This is not something that we can do for a couple of years and then just leave. The problems that we're seeing did not occur overnight. The solutions to address them determined or stuff overnight as well. So if we have some time, we really want to show one more clip. Maybe if there's any questions that you may have.
It was as I hoped it would be, it was an impressive and informative panel and a lot of really interesting ideas they shared about reaching students. And let's see, this needs to go down now a little bit. Let's engage in a dialogue here. Some questions you have, yes. And I'm going to repeat the question, so.
Okay, perfect. So my question was sparked originally by Dr. Sharon, but I'll open it to the panel. And I was captured by a quote which you said that in order for accountability to work, teachers in this case have to be explicitly aware of how they are performing. And I find that a lot of times students in the traditional sense, the feedback that they get is in the form of grades. And that grade is in relation to a test, and that test is in relation to a right or wrong answer. And so when they start to think about themselves and their own journey of self-discovery and learning, they start to think in terms of what's wrong or what's right about me. So my question to the panel is, how do you encourage teachers or coach teachers or teach teachers how do you encourage teachers to help students become lifelong explorers of their own potential?
So the question is, how do you encourage teachers to become lifelong explorers of their own potential and not just evaluate themselves based on the test scores of their students? So.
When you start, okay, close your ears, I'm too tall. When you started your question, I thought that first you would ask how we ensure that our teacher educators think about their own practice. But I think my answer to your question will include both, because everyone is a stakeholder in children's education. We at Catholic University teach our candidates reflective practice to really think about the consequences of their actions and their thoughts in a morally grounded basis. And we also teach children to think about what they do, why they do those actions. We show them the overarching purposes of learning. So they are not just engaged in drill-based activities, but even though sometimes you just have to practice skills, I mean, if you have to do your math addition, that's just what happens. But the context in which they practice those skills are more meaningful and authentic. Let me give you an example. In a second grade classroom or a first grade classroom, when children learn their math facts, there is one way of just giving them the drill sheet, okay, complete it, but we can create a more authentic learner-based environment, let's say a store, where children can learn. So the feedback right there is not going to be, oh, here is the multiple choice and that's the answer, but the feedback comes formally and informally, and a lot of the times children do realize when something is not working. I mean, if you cannot add up your numbers, that's a problem. So oftentimes, the learning environments, effective learning environments, and the assessment loop, the feedback, comes through participation in authentic activities, more like a cognitive apprenticeship model. So in this kind of environment, learning is authentic and assessment is authentic, and it's certainly not the ABCD answer. Did that answer your question? Okay.
And Dr. Barber, how do you keep your teachers motivated? I mean, you talked about the challenges of the demographics. You talked about it being a long process. So if we as a nation are so tied into assessment being student scores on that standardized test, how do you keep your teachers motivated that they are along the right path?
So, in terms of keeping teachers motivated, I think support. Providing support and providing ongoing feedback to teachers as well. And when I say feedback, it's not just a formal or informal observation. There are specific key actions in terms of what I expect for teachers to do to get the desired results. And I expect that to be transferred to students as well. So if a student did complete a particular assignment, being whether it's math, English, social studies, a grade of good, bad, A, B, or C that's not good enough. We want to be real specific. Okay, what's good about this particular assignment here, and how can we move students to the next level? So this is done through ongoing training and professional development, and having a real close relationship with teachers, and as an administrator, being transparent with them in terms of the community that we serve, the challenges that our students come with, and how we go about addressing some of those challenges. But I think the ongoing coaching and ongoing feedback, it's really what's causing us to have the gains that we're make the gains that we're making.
How do you and your mind think you became prepared for this, and how do you get the teachers that are in there doing it?
Okay, how did I come prepared to do this type of work, and how do I get teachers to buy into the vision of what we're doing?
Yeah.
Okay, so just to give you a little brief overview of my background, I started teaching here in DC Public Schools, or Montgomery County Schools, and then DC Public Schools. Worked in a location called Oak Hill Academy with students who were incarcerated. And I was also a middle school principal, elementary school principal. I had different experiences to try to get at the root cause in terms of why were we seeing the things that we were seeing with students who were in high school, middle school. And then when I came down to elementary school, we were still seeing those things. So it was before we even came into the actual school setting. So the partnership that we have with the Promise Heights University of Maryland School of Social Work, I bring my entire leadership team within that, into that partnership, explain the vision and where we're going with things, and then we speak in terms of our outline of our plan. So year 1, year 2, year 3, year 4, there are different phases to the work that we're doing. And to be quite honest with you, those who are really vested in the work, they stay the long hours. A lot of my teachers come in early in the morning, 6:30 in the morning, and we stay late, 8:30, 9:30, 10 o'clock at night, because that's what it takes to get this type of work done.
Yes.
Thank you. So I had a follow-up question actually about that. I'm really curious to learn a little bit more about social and emotional learning at your school and what you're doing through the school day, because that seems so important both for your students, but then also for your teachers. If they're working those hours, how are they able to kind of sustain themselves? And then maybe on a similar note, maybe you could speak a little bit about how you're preparing your students to work in this sort of situations and also cultivate SEL skills in kids.
So looking at the social and emotional learning at the school,
Yeah.
and also how do you prepare teachers to take that on in addition to just the academics?
Exactly. Presumably believing that you have to have those competencies yourself to teach them.
Okay, so one of the first things we did, we engaged in a book study. We read Paul Tufts' How Children Succeed, and really delved into the research around grit, zest, and perseverance with students. So out of that book study, we actually partnered with TASK, the After School Corporation, and we administered the KIP characteristic traits, SEL assessments, and we actually looked at those, the assessment data. I mean, I wish I had more time. Would have really in greater detail in terms of what we found. And we found that our most challenging population was third grade population based on the SEL data. So when we looked at that and we correlated that with attendance and also with achievement data, we found that more intense intervention was needed with that particular grade. Now, in terms of everything that we have going on with the students and how we're addressing that and making sure that teachers aren't burned out, that's why we have my school resource coordinator, Ms. Taylor. So she kind of has that balance, and my administrator who actually stands to the side and says, okay, now this teacher's been becoming overwhelmed. We need to do certain things to make sure that, we're balancing that stress level.
Well, and in fact, as we're working on innovation in educator preparation, we are getting to the working conditions in which candidates will train as candidates and then work as teachers. And it engages us in the process of schools helping to create a culture in which everybody can be sustained, because this is not missionary work and it's not easy. You have to be trained to do this work. So and you have to know how to knit together your resources and target interventions so that you are getting to your goals. So it's very precise work, actually, and it means that you've got to learn to think about productivity in new ways as an individual measure and as a group measure, as a collective, and it engages the colleges of education in helping be partners in that endeavor. And I want to think as well that as we learn better how to knit together these resources and create these complex partnerships, we also learn how to bring in folks who can help relieve some of that stress. Everybody, I bet Baltimore has some TFA teachers around there. Now, TFA teachers should not be teachers of record, but they sure could come in there and help do some of the commodity work. They could come in there and help do some of those drills and help relieve some of the teachers. They could become contributors to productivity. That's what you use the candidate teachers, those who are training to teach, you use them to do some of that commodity work that needs supervision, but they need to learn. You just can't risk what you owe that student in order to get that done. So it has to be done in a way that is closely supervised and you're not letting the student slide in terms of addressing their learning objectives. So we're trying to put together with the administrative groups and the school boards a process of bringing together human resources from a variety of skill levels, so that we can accomplish more work. I'm not going to say at not greater cost, because I think teachers need to make more, but at a cost that is more affordable, because we're utilizing different levels of expertise. So we're not trying to put an expert teacher at every single workstation and on every single task, because some of them can be accomplished at novice levels. But these are things that we've got to really think carefully about, so that we, in fact, can deliver more on an expense base that is more affordable.
Yes.
Hi. We've done a very good job.
Can you stand?
Sure.
Thanks.
Hi. We've done a very good job of capturing the kind of like the snapshot of what's going on today, ELL, urban communities. And I was just wondering, especially for your school, Dr. Barber, I'm sure you have addressed this, I just didn't see the video, the technology piece. I worked in a school where every middle schooler had a computer, but I've also worked in schools where we have, barely enough for one classroom. So I'm just curious what you've done, or if you're, working on grants to implement or incorporate that into the school.
The technology piece.
Yes, so if you didn't see the technology piece, but we are addressing that as well. And we had no other choice with the new park assessments that will be administered next year, and we field tested this year. I saw this coming in, and I knew that the park assessments would be heavily based on the use of technology. So we ordered 2 mobile labs. So in addition to our standalone computer lab, students have we have a total of 60 laptops as well. iPads. We have additional iPads that I ordered, so we started building this earlier on during my tenure in year 1, year 2, and year 3. Now, Baltimore is going through this whole building modernization project where schools are being modified. So, fortunately, we're in year 6, so things such as the Promethean boards and the smart boards will come then. It just didn't make sense to spend that money now just for them to do something else with it. So to get more bang for my buck, so to speak, is to really focus on the iPads and also focus on the use of the laptops and things of that nature.
Dr. Barber, I have a question. You mentioned the age, 3rd grade, was a critical crisis age or stage.
Yes.
And I'm curious as to whether the African-American boys are more affected than the African-American girls. And the reason I'm curious about that is because of the conspiracy to destroy black boys, that whole framework, which I experienced as a parent raising an African-American son, and I had to pull my own son out of public school midway in the 4th grade because of the depression issues. I saw him taking on this strange image of himself that didn't come from his family, etc. And I'm also wondering whether it's been addressed as to, we saw the pictures and the problems with this group of people who are over here in this area, but I'm wondering if the kids know the historical context. The United States, in my opinion, is divided into areas, and some people are thrown into or directed into certain areas, and they get choked off simply by articulating their address. And kids tend to be impacted by all that means economically, socially, ideologically, without knowing why. So those are my 2 questions. And then one more question for Dr. Gillette. When you talked about the preschool programs, has any consideration been made that the immigrant parents may have consciously made decisions to keep their young children at home longer just because they want to love them more, want to feed them right, want to make sure that their children are getting access to everything that they have before they let them loose into what can sometimes be, not always, chaotic environments, codes, exhausted teachers, etc. So those are my questions.
Dr. Barber, if you want to address yours.
Okay. So looking at 3rd grade, very critical grade, and that really came out more when we administered the KIP SEL assessment. So we started a cyber male mentoring program to connect back into technology as well. So we partnered with a local faith-based organization, Union Baptist Church, where we identified several African-American male students, and we mentor them on a bi-weekly basis formally. And also we expose them to different activities. The most recent activity, we took them to the Wizards game about a month ago, but then we also want them to see the other side as well. So we secured a trip to George Washington University, where they'll actually get exposure to college life, and we'll start talking to them about college life and things that they need to do now to prepare them for college life. And we looked specifically at grade 3, even before the SEL data came out, because that's the real shift in terms of literacy, where kids move from learning to reading to learn. So grade 3 to 4. So we figured if we intervene and provide very intense services there, right, that would lessen the likelihood of them going down the wrong path. We have a partnership, which I didn't reference during the video, but it is part of the PowerPoint, called Reading Partners, where we're very targeted. We identify 50 students who are reading between 6 months and 2 years behind on grade level, and we provide one-on-one tutoring to those students throughout the course of the day with volunteers, doctors, lawyers, engineers actually come in and work with those students. And then we're seeing the difference in the data in terms of students who are reading below grade level, how we're narrowing that gap with the 3rd grade population.
Thank you. Thank you very much. I want to talk about maybe the motivations you've seen in terms of immigrant parents of why they may not be a part of the preschool program.
Yeah, thank you for that question. And there's definitely a wide perception, I think, that immigrant parents prefer home care, and particularly in a lot of communities. The research is pretty thin on this topic, but there's not strong evidence, actually, that immigrant parents prefer to keep kids at home. I think it really is more a question of access. Of course, it depends a lot on community. So parents are coming from a wide variety of places. Mexico, for example, has pre-kindergarten. So parents who are coming from Mexico often are expecting that to be available. From other sending countries, it's not the same story. And to the extent that there are differences and preferences for home care, I think, you know, parents might not all have the same yolk inside, but parents all want the best for their kids. And so once parents hear about all of the really strong research on brain development and the importance of early education for kids, I think parents pretty quickly are like, yes, sign me up for that. I want that for my child too. So.
And I think it speaks to the heart of your questions, which is if the programs that they're being sent to value them for who they are, then it is a good experience. If, you know, I was talking to a child in South Africa whose family could finally afford the parent fees to go to a better school, and the first thing they did was take away the child's name in his mother tongue and give him a name that they could pronounce more easily. So it's sort of, you have to make sure that the educational benefits are also paired with the cultural respect and the respect for the individual. And I think the people here at this table are really doing this critical work in that area. Am I right? We're out of time, or okay? So I'm gonna wrap it up without you giving me that. But you know, I think that throughout the day we've seen people who are really committed to making sure every child thrives. From pre-K, from working with families at pre-K, through providing the services, to connecting with the community that's so powerful. I think we really as a society can't just live in these little silos anymore. We need to be interacting with each other, and we need to be taking advantage of the expertise that people have in different facets to provide this full continuum of services for the school, and to make sure that the teachers that are being educated today are prepared for the schools they're going to go into, prepared for the social and emotional development, prepared for classroom management, prepared with the latest pedagogy in a way that meets the needs of all children. So I thank the Rumi Forum for organizing the day and for giving us the opportunity to hear from all these wonderful experts today. Thank you, and thank you.